What exactly is this thing right here? This ridge of metal behind the blade on a table saw. Quite often, new woodworkers and DIYers will ask me to identify this thing, and I'll always tell them that this is the most important feature on your table saw other than the blade itself. This feature is called a riving knife, and it changed carpentry and woodworking forever when it became standard on table saws in the mid-2000s. Today, I'm going to talk about what a riving knife is, what it does, and why you should never use a table saw without one. And that's coming up next on the Honest Carpenter Show. So about the worst thing that can go wrong when you're using a table saw, other than like feeding your hand into the blade, is a phenomenon called kickback. It's a malfunction where the stock or wood being fed into the table saw suddenly binds up on the blade, and the blade launches it back towards the operator in the blink of an eye. Anyone who grew up woodworking in the 1990s or earlier probably has a pretty clear memory of kickback. It used to happen all the time with table saws. I've heard of people getting soft organs ruptured when kickback hit them in the stomach, or having their hands and wrists torn open when the rough board edge shot through their grip. There used to be a million horror stories about kickback. And then sometime around the turn of the millennium, those stories sort of died down, and I almost never heard another one again. What happened? The riving knife came into mass production. The riving knife is the main deterrent to kickback on a table saw, and it works by effectively preventing wood from binding up on the saw blade. The knife, as I said, is a thin steel fin attached to the arbor assembly. It rides directly behind and in line with the blade. And I mean exactly in line with the blade. So when the saw is activated and you pass a piece of lumber through it, the riving knife sits in the blade's kerf, the little gap formed in the wood as the blade carves its own path. The knife can sit here safely because it's thicker than the body of the saw blade, but thinner than the carbide teeth that most saw blades have. So it's just slightly narrower than the kerf groove. You can keep pushing the piece of wood through and the riving knife won't do anything to disrupt it. The split pieces will pass right by on either side. But if pressure and stress in the wood grain cause the cut to begin squeezing shut, a thing that happens occasionally with dimensional lumber, the riving knife goes to work. The two split ends will begin to squeeze the riving knife rather than the blade itself. The riving knife will prevent the pieces from binding so tightly that they grab the saw blade, which would cause the piece of wood to get thrown back. It's like a little wedge that holds the pieces apart so that they can't close up and do harm. This ingenious little fin has prevented more accidents than you could ever count, which is why, since 2009, the Underwriters Laboratory has mandated that every new table saw on the market have one built in. The predecessor to the riving knife was the splitter, which essentially did the same thing, but in a clumsier fashion. The modern riving knife is superior to it because it hugs the blade very tightly, but still gives it some space, and it can also be height adjusted for different cuts. With my saw unplugged, I can remove the throat plate, loosen a knob, and slide the riving knife up or down to a couple different height settings. The idea here is that if you want to make a blind cut, which is a partial depth cut like a dado or groove, you can ensure that the riving knife won't prevent the wood from passing all the way over the blade. You just set your riving knife to a lower depth. It's that easy. Table saws also come with detachable guards and anti-kickback pawls, and you should always use those features. I take mine off so that I can demonstrate things more effectively on the channel. The guard dissuades you from physically touching the blade by giving you an early warning, and the kickback pawls are there to catch or stop a board that is springing into the air. They're great, but personally I don't think any safety feature is as effective as the riving knife. I make every single cut with mine and never take it off. The only time I would think about removing it is if I was using a thin kerf blade, which is too narrow for the knife. But I don't really do that too much in my shop, and I can't remember the last time I had kickback from binding. You can still generate kickback by twisting the board severely as it passes through the blade. But always using a fence or a miter gauge when you cut helps prevent this too. So that's how riving knives work. When you start using table saws that have them, you'll quickly forget that they're there because they're so unobtrusive. But if you do get a really warped piece of wood that's grabbing the riving knife and stopping the cut, back the piece off a little bit and turn off the saw. You can lift the board free when the blade stops spinning, knowing full well that the riving knife just saved you from a nasty kickback accident. It doesn't happen often, but you want the riving knife there for those rare occasions. I'll link the updated version of my Dewalt down in the description below, along with a few good push guides and blades. Feel free to shop those links, and remember that when you do, we receive a small commission at no extra charge to you. As always, thanks for watching. Be sure to check back in for more videos coming up soon, and please consider subscribing and hitting that little bell button to turn on notifications. That way you'll know the moment we post something. I'm Ethan James with thehonestcarpenter.com. I'll see you next time.